Buying your own house is one of the most important decisions you can make to start acquiring assets and build up equity. But I think a lot of people get really intimidated or hear stories of people losing money after buying a house. I just wanted to resolve an old myth about buying a house and convince you that buying a home is not only easy, but also really profitable. Let's talk about the pros and cons of renting versus buying really quickly. Renting. Pros are usually you can have bad credit and not have a problem renting. You're not tied down to a mortgage. Also, you don't have to take care of the maintenance, and you don't have to worry if the neighborhood depreciates because it's not your house. Cons are, you are paying more per month for the same price house. As in, if you bought the house that you're renting right now, your mortgage payment would be less than your rent. And you're usually sharing your floor, your ceiling, or the walls with your neighbors if you live in an apartment or a duplex. You're not building any equity, and it's not an asset. Also, there's restrictions on the pets you can own and other freedoms, like you can't redecorate the way you want to. The rent could rise at any time, and the owner could decide to sell at any point and just ask you to leave. You could have been there for 10 or 20 years, but the owner has a change of heart, wants to sell, and now you have no place to live. Owning a home. Pros are, you are building up equity by paying down your mortgage. You get to benefit if the neighborhood appreciates, not your landlord. And you have creative control. You can renovate or redecorate at will without having to check in with someone. Cons are, there are more secondary costs when you own, like maintenance, taxes, and insurance. If the market depreciates, your equity does go down. Also, you have to be able to qualify. Usually that means enough income or credit. But there are programs for low-income people, by the way, so that you can own your own home. And you're tied down to a mortgage. So let's talk about the cons of buying your own home. I want to show you that buying a home isn't as scary as you think, and that most of the supposed negatives I just mentioned might not even be that relevant. Most of the cons I just listed are simply myths. You might have heard this one. You should only buy a house if you'll be living in it for 3 years. And as much as that might be true, there are ways, if you're smart about it, to buy and sell in a shorter amount of time without losing money, or without being afraid of being stuck. Now, if we look at it, it's easy to see why people would think this is true. It all comes down to simple math. Here's a scenario. Most houses appreciate at 3% a year, so if you buy a house right at market value, so you're buying for $100,000 and it's worth $100,000, you'll put $5,000 down and you owe $95,000 on your mortgage. Okay, so you wait 6 months and you want to sell, but your house is only worth $101,500. That's because it's been appreciating at 3%. In order to sell, you'll be paying realtor commissions and closing costs. It's most common to pay 3% of the sales price to your realtor and 3% to the realtor who brings you a buyer. On top of that, take away another 1 to 2% for closing costs and buyer concessions. So you come away losing money because you only get $101,500 for the sale, minus 8%, which is $8,100. $93,400 is the amount you get after you sell. How much does that leave you with in your pocket? Well, in the beginning of owning and paying off a mortgage, most of your payment does not go towards paying down the mortgage. It just goes to interest. So 6 months goes by and you still owe a little over $94,000. So in this case, you just lost $1,000 by selling 6 months after you bought. It makes sense at this point that you would need to stay longer. But really what I'm telling you is, you just bought it wrong. You don't actually need to stay longer. If you bought it the correct way, you could be able to sell at any point. In the 3-year scenario, your house is appreciated to over $109,000, and your mortgage balance has been paid down to $90,000. So the 8% from before, for realtors and closing costs, is $8,700. So you would get $10,000 in your pocket when you sell, even after all the fees. This is where the 3-year rule comes into play. Really what they're saying is, the longer you hold, the better chance you have of not losing money. But I'm not just going to shove a one-size-fits-all rule at you. That basically means if you want to buy a house, you have to be a slave to it and stay in it for 3 years. What if you want to take a year off and travel or move into a different house? This could totally be an option if you buy strategically. What I want you to see is there are ways to buy where you don't lose money if you sell 3 months later, and also ways to buy where your house can make you money every month by renting after you move. The strategic way to buy a house involves a few key factors, and there are hundreds of books out there for first-time homebuyers listing all the things you need to take into account, but what it comes down to is just thinking like an investor. Your house is your investment. You shouldn't buy a house purely on emotion or your tastes and preferences. I know that sentence is contrary to what you've heard or believed, but there's a reason I say this. When an investor buys a house, it has to make sense numbers-wise, and most of the time they're looking for the type of house that would attract the average buyer. Something that would appeal to a wide range of buyers. When I buy a house, I first make sure I'm getting it at a discount. It might be discounted because it's distressed or outdated or just needs some basic renovations. Also, the house might be fine, but the seller is distressed because they're in foreclosure or have an emergency where they need to sell quickly. Now, one good rule of thumb is never to buy the nicest house in the neighborhood, but try to buy the worst house in a nice neighborhood and renovate it to be above average. The way that I bought my first house was by working backwards from what I wanted my monthly payment to be. Then I used a mortgage calculator online to figure out what was the max purchase price that I could afford. From there, I figured out that I could afford around $175,000 purchase price. And I looked at the houses that were listed around $190,000 so that I could make a low offer and get them down to $175,000. But I also wanted that house to have the potential to be fixed up and be worth $230,000 after I did some renovations. This is very similar to how I buy when I'm looking for a house to flip. I got the house for $175,000 when it was worth $190,000, which means I made money as soon as I bought the house. And then once I fixed it up, I had even more equity. Now the point of this is, this meant that I could sell my house at any time and not be afraid of losing money. I already had $15,000 that I kind of just got for free, just on the actual value of the house. And the second thing I made sure of was that the average rent for my house in that area was at least 25% more than my monthly mortgage payment. And why 25%? Because that is enough of a margin to be able to move anywhere and hire a property manager to rent it out for you and be able to pay them and still save for maintenance and vacancy. So this means that you'll continue to build up equity and you aren't tied down to your mortgage. Lastly, something I did that won't apply to everyone, but I plan on making another video about it. It's called house hacking. It's an amazing concept that essentially lets you live for free if you're willing to take on a mortgage. I got a 4-bedroom house so that I could live in 1 bedroom and rent out the other 3. This could also apply to buying a duplex or a house with a basement you don't need to use. And usually the rents from the other roommates will more than cover your monthly mortgage cost. I hope you see now how buying a house strategically can make it a lot less intimidating and really increases the benefits of owning an asset. Please subscribe to see more videos like this and comment with what you'd like to learn about next.